Okay, and so now I think I am going to introduce our next speaker. So up next, we have Coffee on the Moon with the Galaxis gal Inara Tabir. Coffee on the Moon is our new monthly segment. If you missed part 1 last week, you can find the recording of the live stream on any of F4F's social media channels. But in this monthly segment, Inara will be holding interviews to discuss our monthly topic and how this topic of reference, we can work together to be a multi-planetary society. So Inara, take it away and introduce us to today's guests you're interviewing.
Rachel, thank you so much. I'm excited to be back here with Conversations for the Future, and it's particularly this guest today, Amy Imhoff.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Hey, Amy, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be such a great chat.
Absolutely. So Amy works with individuals and small businesses to create, maintain, and grow their digital presence through website design, social media, marketing collateral, editorial content, and more. She also hosts panels at conventions and writes for a variety of entertainment websites about women in media, especially in science fiction. Her current role as Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships at Explore Mars, a little nonprofit funded by NASA. When do you sleep? Or do you sleep?
I do sleep. I sleep pretty often, frankly. You got to prioritize that healthcare, that self-care, right? Sleep is self-care.
Absolutely, absolutely. So explain to me how you got from, what led you into this path in life? Like, what was your entry into media, communications, sci-fi?
So I've always been a science fiction fan. I was a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation starting at 7 years old. So, you know, I came up with Picard and the crew. And then, of course, when I was 13, a captain named Captain Janeway strolled onto the scene. And, you know, my life was pretty much changed. It was great to see a woman in the captain's chair. And I really think it opened up a lot of possibilities to me. And also, all throughout high school and college, I'm big nerd. Look at my collection I have behind me here. I got my Janeways and my Scullys. I'm a big X-Files fan as well. So I really just started engaging with fandom at that level, and I've met so many wonderful people through my fandom. And when I started going to my first Star Trek conventions, I saw that there were panels being given on women's representation in sci-fi, and there were also not a ton of women hosting panels on main stages. So I felt that that was definitely a glaring omission on behalf of convention runners. So I was trying to get more women in those spaces. I would have women come up to me after panels and say, oh my goodness, you know, this was such a great conversation. You ask questions that, you know, are different and new. And I think that the subjects on the stage also really took to that. I found that the actors, of course, you know, if we've all been to conventions, actors have getting the same question over and over again. So I really want to ask them about what they're excited about, you know, what gets them out of bed in the morning, things that we all love, like what are you watching? What are your favorite books? You know, where are you traveling? That kind of thing. So I'm just, I was always very interested in that area. I started doing panels in, I think it was 2013. So I guess 10 years at this point. And that led me to, you know, doing more and more with fandom, with commentary, writing for anthologies, just general science fiction. You know, I'm, like I said, in addition to Star Trek and X-Files, I love Battlestar Galactica, Lost, all of these properties, you know, The Expanse, most recently For All Mankind, which I won't shut up about because I love it so much. And in 2016, it was the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. They put the Women of Trek panel on the main stage at Star Trek Las Vegas. And I said, well, we need a captain. We need Kate Mulgrew. And one thing led to another. And in 2018, I started as Kate Mulgrew's media director. So I do all of her social media, book tour stuff, website, lots of different things, you know, whatever she needs in terms of media and interacting with her fans. So that has been a dream come true. I would like to note that I did work for 12 years in a cubicle situation. I went from being a financial editor to being a technology editor and writer with Gartner. And then I just really realized that this is not the path for me. I'm not meant to sit in a cubicle all day. I'm meant to be more dynamic, more creative, you know, being able to execute, being able to plan big events. And I really said to myself, you know, how am I going to get to that point? And in March of 2017, Gartner went through a bit of a reorganization and a bunch of people got let go, including myself. And it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. So I started my own digital content business. I went a little bit from one thing to the other. I taught college writing for a while. I was at a small technology company that really didn't know how to utilize media and social in a way that I felt was effective. And it kind of let me see that, I have this knowledge base. I'm able to execute. I think maybe I could help small businesses and individual people like Kate, and other Star Trek people who, a lot of the actors are over 60. They came up at an age when it wasn't. They're not digital natives. I'm barely a digital native myself. I'm like right on the cusp. I had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood is what I like to say. But this is wonderful. Thank you for having me here. And of course, that is what led me to you, Inara, at Star Trek Las Vegas this year. Inara's with Gaze in Space. And I've been doing stuff with Dan and Gaze in Space for a couple of years now. And just meeting you was wonderful and serendipitous. And she said, you need to come join our space family. I said, well, I found my next client base. So space marketing and being able to connect the fans with the people in the space industry, because the fans have the interest. We need to generate this excitement that we haven't really seen since the Apollo program. We need to generate that for Artemis. I want to generate that for what all of these private space companies are doing, because we have such a global space economy now that, they need to have their product and their ideas, broadcast out into the world.
Absolutely. So it sounds like visibility was pivotal to your life choices and to the path you took. Yeah. That's one of the themes I definitely want to cover. There's this understanding I think you and I both have about how sci-fi and science interact and about how they feed off each other. I like to say that the very first sci-fi began when the first cave person was outside and looked up and saw the stars and was super excited and was like, what is going on? And then they go back to their cave and they're etching what they think they see. And then culture begins derived from this. It starts to grow. That feeds the scientists that start. And so it's back and forth. And you can really apply this to Gene Roddenberry, his life and his inspiration in the sciences. And then he created this sci-fi, and that has created so many scientists. There's something powerful about it. I think when we look at the Apollo era, we created a national myth. We created a living sci-fi, if you will. These astronauts were, like jet fighter pilots, and they were standing in front of Corvettes, and they were, the great heroes. And so that excitement that was created was absolutely scripted. I mean, it was well-deserved. They did amazing things, but it was a scripted journey that brought the whole nation together for this, Cold War mission to be the first in space. I think something happened at a point where sci-fi overtook reality. So we had this amazing larger-than-life moment where Kennedy's saying, by the end of the decade, we're going to be on the moon, and people couldn't believe it. They were like, this is not real. This was the stuff of sci-fi. But then there was a point where we had done that, and then sci-fi was pumping out like better graphics. Star Wars came along, Star Trek came along, and people got more excited about the fiction than they did about the reality. And so I saw this, I think we've all seen this fizzling of public interest where instead of getting together for family barbecues to watch the launches, people were like, oh, okay, cool. Something's happening in space, or they don't even realize it. Now we're at a point where sci-fi, we see things like Avatar from James Cameron, and it's like the height of our abilities in storytelling, but people are getting really excited again about space, like especially with the big companies like SpaceX and Axiom and Blue Origin. Have you noticed a shift as far as like the connection between sci-fi and science from your perspective, from the media side?
I've definitely noticed that people are implementing these ideas that we never thought that we would be like, carrying an entire encyclopedia, camera, calculator, email device around in our pocket, and that we would all have them. One that could also like gamify that experience. So it's basically took everything with media and put it into the palm of your hand. And, we saw that on Star Trek with the pads and the tricorders and all of those things that were really just Gene Roddenberry's brainchild, and, the prop masters and of Star Trek, and how that they designed what our future was supposed to look like, which I find very fascinating of how like, prop evolution and how art departments take, these everyday things and they give them a fresh coat of paint and a fresh look and a fresh design. Like the Michael and Denise Okuda really designed the look of Star Trek Next Generation, which was a very big departure from kind of the candy colored uniforms of the original Star Trek. And we look at the laptop sitting on Picard's desk now, and it looks really big and clunky because we have like these super streamlined, the MacBook Air and all that. So it's very, of course you see the evolution of how that worked out in between these scientists that were coming up into developing this technology. And I get so many women in particular, obviously everyone of all genders, but women in particular coming up to Kate at, I sit at her table during conventions. I hear all the conversations that she has. I hear women come up to her and give her a copy of their thesis and say, I dedicated this to Captain Janeway. She's the one who said, and Kate will say, this repeatedly, which is, I was told, she'll have a woman come up to her and say, I was told as a woman that I'm going to be in a lab. I'm going to be, helping to work on these technologies that are going to put people in space. No, I don't want to sit in a lab. I want to go to space. I want to do this. I want to be the next generation of astronaut. And like you were talking about with that narrative, with they made it cool, right? They stood in front of their Corvettes. They did like a media campaign, a media blitz. And it's so important to get messaging out there and to have everybody and it was so much easier, I think, to have everybody on the same page media wise in the 60s and 70s, because you didn't have, now, every astronaut has their own social media platform, which is great. And I think we should follow all of them and see what they're up to. But it was a very cohesive marketing campaign that they put together. And it's interesting that you made that point, really. I think seeing the technology outpacing on the screen, outpacing what we're doing and what we're capable of doing, that lets us dream, right? That leaves us to have that space in order to say, well, what's next? What's next after an iPhone? Because there's going to be that evolutionary step forward in the science and the technology. And I really think a lot of it is probably going to be energy based in the future. We've been talking and looking at different technologies. I think of Kate did The Man Who Fell to Earth. She played the head of the CIA. And that is, of course, a remake of a much older property. We need nuclear fusion. We have scientists that have already kind of maintained it for like a few seconds. I just read an interesting article on that recently about how we have to the way you bombard. I am an English major. I would like to note that I am an English major. So I'm communicating these scientific topics in a conversational but educational way. And if I am wrong, somebody leap into the chat and tell me I'm wrong. But we do need nuclear fusion. And I think once we surpass that, we're going to change. If our goals for space, everything that we're going to use for space is going to be used here on Earth first. We're going to improve our lives here on Earth first. So people say, why should we spend money on organizations that are, telling us what we need in order to have deep space travel? Because we're going to need that technology here first. It's going to have, 20 different implementations here before it gets out there. So I think that evolution and watching that happen has been really cool as somebody who's grown up with, dreaming about that Star Trek future. And also, there's a component of it that is not just technological, there's a component of it that's social and, progressing us socially as a society. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I say science is real, LGBT people have extreme value in our society, these concepts that I think we're still fighting over, especially, in the last 6 years since the Trump presidency and this devaluation of science and all of that, that's setting us back. So I'm always interested to see who's moving that bar forward.
Absolutely. And I think you make a good point. We need fusion. We need all kinds of technologies. I think we're going to nail fusion in a big way long before we learn to be good to each other.
Oh, yeah.
And that's important. But we are moving closer and closer. There was this shift from government space with NASA to new space. Jerry O'Neill calls it the quiet revolution, where we went from this kind of centralized control of that world to private industry and the market being able to diversify all the different ways we can interact and we can go after those futures. I think we had a shift where we went from being very concerned with how we message the public and getting them on board and having the national ethos be in line with us to NDAs and backroom deals and having to keep your technology quiet for competitive reasons. And so the standard has become the standard became, don't let anyone know what you're doing too soon, because then they'll get ahead of you. And in that, I think in that mix, we lost the connection with the public. And that's one of the ways I think we did. Now we're trying to re-engage with the public on the space side. We do amazing things. There's all kinds, and I'm sure people in this room, just like me, are privy to information behind the scenes that would blow people's minds. Like, we have so much happening, and we're really pressing in the next 20 years to make humanity multiplanetary in big ways. With the public, the reaction often is, why are you wasting money doing these things that don't matter when you could be doing, you could be saving the rainforest or feeding the homeless, or, these things that do matter, but they have these things they've lined up in their minds of like, these are the things we should be doing. We get that reaction often, where in Hollywood, it's $600 billion a year. And they're like, why haven't you made the next thing I can binge watch? Why isn't the next season out yet? Like, the public is engaged with the storytelling on the Hollywood side. From your perspective, from both, that you've seen both sides, like, what could we do better? What are we missing on this side that would help engage the people more?
I do think that cohesive messaging is what we really need to be focusing on. And also just a narrative of, it's interesting, the way misinformation spreads, and the way our social media platforms have, bots and all of these, the technology, like you said, the technology it's interesting because the technology we think has evolved to do good, right? But some of the technology is not doing good, and we know that, we all know that, and we all worry about things like data privacy and security, and I think that the way that we need to kind of get that messaging out to kind of get people excited about space, look at the biggest properties on Earth, right? The biggest properties are Marvel, Star Wars. Yes, Disney owns half of them, and that's a problem too. But Star Trek, just the things that people are excited about and that get them tuning in and get them binging and talking about things on social media. Like, for example, I think For All Mankind is actually a great example here, because I say to people, are you watching For All Mankind? It's on Apple TV. And they go, no, what's it about? And I'm like, well, it's what if the space race never ended? But it's also, what if women were involved in the space program from the beginning? Because Russia, and this is not a spoiler, at the end of season 2 of the whole show, season one, episode 2, Russia puts a woman on the moon. And it causes Nixon to say, where are the women? Where are the women in our space program? We need to get these pilots in here. So they bring in a class of, 7 or 8 female pilots, just like they did in reality. But those women never got to go. Sally Ride finally got to go and be the first American woman in space. But, you have women who were a part of the Mercury group who never got to go up, stuff like that. So it changes. The best part about For All Mankind is it could happen. It's an alternate history. So you see that because of the way they invest in the space program, they get iPhones essentially, or Blackberries, in the early 90s. It shows the progression of technology. And the reason people are not watching For All Mankind, this is not a diss, Sony is not marketing it to the right people. If they marketed it to the Star Trek fans and they knew how to engage with Star Trek fans on Twitter, that show would be so much bigger. Yes, it's great that we're finally spreading it through word of mouth now that it's completed 3 seasons. But not a lot of shows even make it to 3 seasons these days. So you need to come out of the gate and say, look at this slate of amazingly talented actors that we have here. Look what they're doing. I should be seeing Sonia Walger's picture in Times Square when I go into the city. They should be like, this is the first woman on the moon. We still haven't had the first woman on the moon. And that, to me, that's crazy that it's 2023 and we're hopefully going to get there next year or the year after. So the messaging surrounding something is so important. If they had a coordinated big push, if Sony were putting the money behind For All Mankind, that gets put behind something like the new Game of Thrones show, or, they have it, they have the money exists. It's what you're choosing to promote. It's like, if NASA is choosing to promote a different project, then we're not going to hear about, maybe someone in a lab who's made a crazy breakthrough. They have to put that money and that time and that interviews, put a face on it. The algorithm loves faces. I tell that to people when they're doing social media. You put up a graphic, you want to give people information, but Facebook will downgrade your graphic if it has more than 25% text. So the messaging is what we need in order to get people involved, get the public invested, get the fans who are spending hundreds of dollars on photo ops with Chris Hemsworth and Chris Evans and all the Chris's. We have to take that money, take just some of it, take like 1/7 of it, and give that money to a cause or a technology or a organization that is doing something life-changing and see what happens. Let them run with it.
So if you have your options, you have your wish, you have like really no limits on what you could do, and you could look at these space companies across the board, how would you institute a policy across the board to create a communication network that would reach outside the bubble? So for instance, space companies, there is no space industry. I think I'll go back to that. There is no space industry, and that's a huge problem. Companies are building for space, but they have this huge problem when it comes to money, where the traditional ideas of where's your exit and what's your risk are profound in on the space side, because the exits are often just nowhere in sight and the risks are as high as it gets. And there is no major infrastructure in space. And we talk about being a space company, it's like we're reaching towards space, but there's nothing there to really bring those profits back. So companies are often trying to keep the lights on. And so many space companies arise and fall before the public even knows they exist. And so in that sort of climate where it's really hard to get a space company off the ground and make it successful and give it longevity, communications are they're prioritized to get the grants written or to get the government contracts or to be in the bubble of the space conferences. And so they don't really reach outside to luxury brands, fashion, Hollywood, the places where people are. If you have an idea, like share with me some ideas of how we could get those communications off the ground in that kind of environment.
I do think companies need to prioritize their communication departments. I see that, I'll do like a website overview, or I'll check out, let's say I'm thinking about, let's say I need a new client, and I say, okay, who is doing stuff in this sector that I really like, that I think maybe could use my services. Or not even that, just look around at the major players, right? Look around at the major players in the industry. What does their messaging look like? Do they understand social media? I think that is, you get a lot of executives over 50 who are not digital natives. They have not grown up with this, and they don't realize the vast resource of people that are constantly having a conversation all day long. I mean, I could pick up my phone and have a Twitter conversation with pretty much Star Trek fans all over the world about, the Star Trek Prodigy just wrapped. Did you watch it? Did you like it? What did you think about what happened with, you can do that with media in a way that the space industry and a lot of sectors have not harnessed. And I remember when I worked for a technology company, they said that most processes are not automated still. And that's true. It's like a very high percentage of processes are not automated. We think because we can take a picture of a check and deposit it without leaving our house and going to the bank anymore, that we've like reached the point of automated processes. We have not. The major industries like banking and insurance and just any major institution that you use every day to live, like, shipping logistics, like buying logistics, like GE. I remember when I worked for a little tiny app startup right after I left my job in 2017. And they said, it was very interesting, I felt, that GE was still operating in a way where like a very old-fashioned model where usually a gentleman would come to your office, and if you're buying giant parts like giant turbines and giant lighting solutions for warehouses and all this stuff, and he would have a catalog, or the catalog would be on his computer, and you'd have to pick out the different parts from the catalog, and he would place the order. And there's always a middleman. There was always some kind of there was no direct buying option. And to me, I was like, that feels like a very old-fashioned manufacturing model that maybe we definitely, as Americans, we kind of perfected the assembly line. That was something that was a very unique to American industry that we spread throughout the world. And that was still the process. I was really surprised. I said, our company, our app was creating digital platforms for people to make these big purchases. When you think about, how does an aircraft get built? And I'm learning so much through Explore Mars. I'm learning about, the major players and who makes rocket parts. It's Boeing and Lockheed Martin and Aerojet Rocketdyne and Northrop Grumman and all of these companies. But I'm wondering if they have this old school paradigm still, where this is, how do we get these products? How do we order, how do we, and the 3D printing, that's a whole nother area hasn't even, I don't think, been correctly tapped yet. Yes, companies are doing great things with 3D printing, but I think that a lot of these processes are still in an old school fashion. I mean, we just saw with the airline industry, we just saw a major break in the FAA and their software. I think, and I've known that software in this, my dad used to be an air traffic control agent. They're basically still using the same stuff that my dad used in the 70s. So that is just crazy to me. Like, they need to upgrade this.
Can you imagine a computer from the 1970s? I mean, we wouldn't tolerate that in our homes. So we definitely.
I know. Well, it was really funny because they said that recently there was, I think it was here at JFK where there was an airplane coming in this way and then they almost collided like this. It was just, they were both on the runway. Nobody was going that fast. But my dad would say they would have near misses all the time because people weren't like looking and talking to each other. If it's still relying on that old fashioned model of like looking and talking and not necessarily, a new technology or a better technology, then we need to step that up, right? We need to see like, these are the problems that we think are when something basic fails and people's like freak out. It's like, well, what is driving this force and how can it be made better? How can we take the smartest people in society? That's what Starfleet is. Smart people solving problems, right? And those problems
so badly.
What?
We need Starfleet so badly.
We need Starfleet so badly. It's true. But we have to get to the point where our attitudes are also going to mirror that of Starfleet. Because if we're all, if it's a bunch of admirals in a room screaming at each other, that's not going to work either. So.
Absolutely. Well, maybe as we're trying to put that messaging out to the public that space matters, maybe we need to be reflecting back to the space industry that media and communications matter and giving them the tools that they need to reach the public beyond their bubbles, because that's really the symbiotic flow that's necessary. I want to go to questions really quick, but before I do, let us know, you've got some things coming up with Explore Mars, right?
I do. So our Human to Mars Summit is every May in DC. It's at the National Academy of Sciences, beautiful space. This will be my first one. I'm very excited. We're trying to bring some Star Trek people in. So that'll be very cool in order to, kind of run these discussions with like, the real life Dr. Crusher or, Peggy Whitson, the real life She's not going to be there. She's very busy with Axiom, but, the real life Captain Janeway, these people who are working in our space program in, private sector, that they're going to take the next steps as humanity. So we want to bring those in. Explore Mars is funded partially by NASA, partially by donations from fabulous individuals like everyone watching today. And we really want to provide research and conversation. We provide connection. We provide what humanity needs to take the next steps into space. NASA looks at our research and they make investment decisions based on, this is what we need in terms of like growing food. This is, there's no, unfortunately, there are no rest stops between here and Mars. So if we put our whole mission is to the moon, because we support a lunar base, we support every kind of infrastructure building on the moon, but then on to Mars, right? So we're hoping we're going to get to Mars by the 2030s. I think it's possible. Especially considering that we've been able to operate a remote aircraft on Mars. Like, that is amazing to me, what they've accomplished with the rovers and everything. So yes, please check out our website. It's exploremars.org. We also do a STEM education for young people, especially girls. We partner with lots of different nonprofits like Future Engineers and some of these other really great, getting kids into the sciences, kids into STEM. So we have a whole bunch of info on our website. So please do that and follow us. We are at Explore Mars on pretty much everything.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And you can put the link in the chat for us, right?
I will do that. Yes.
So we do have one question. Courtney, actually, would you like to unmute and ask Amy directly?
Sure. Amy, thank you very much. And your passion is most certainly infectious. So thank you for that. I'm an old guy, been in this business about 40, 45 years, primarily in advocating commercial space. I've had my share of a couple of successes, a lot of failures. It's a tough business. And I'm wondering how one translates the enthusiasm in, for example, cinema you referred to. I had the honor recently of interviewing the showrunner, Dr. Shankar, for The Expanse.
Yes, I just saw him on a live cast as well.
Yeah,
so
amazing.
Cool guy, really cool guy.
And of course, he worked on For All Mankind. So I get it, the enthusiasm, but how, in your judgment, this is a tough question, I grant you, how do you get that, particularly among the young people, to translate that enthusiasm into what really is a lot of hard work? There's not a business for the faint-hearted. and one has to steel oneself for a lot of challenges and so forth. Just your perspective on how do you take that enthusiasm you've referred to earlier and pass it on to the new generation.
I do think that, there have to be changes at an institutional level in order to support diversity in those companies and in Hollywood. We need to have more women behind the camera. We need to have, more women and people of color writing these stories, so that you're creating that enthusiasm for everyone, that everyone can see themselves in those roles. The women who saw themselves in Captain Janeway and Scully, have gone on to do some wonderful things. They've also gone on to, for example, with Scully, to criticize the men that wrote her, the men that created her. When the show came back for the X-Files revival in 2016 and 2018, we pointed out all of these flaws and all of these things that they were doing. They were making Scully's fertility the main issue. She didn't get to do a single autopsy the entire 2 seasons. You need to show women, you need to show capable, fabulous women doing these things. You show people of color, show LGBT people. It took until Star Trek Discovery to have a gay couple on a starship. First you need to see it, like the Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media says, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think that is women and people of color and LGBT and non-binary people, they need to be able to feel like they are welcome in these places. That is a major hurdle, I think. You're finally getting, for example, I interviewed Nami Melamod. She's a composer for Star Trek Prodigy and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And there are so few women in film music. I could barely name 2 women in film music. And I had a very lovely friend in college who was extremely into John Williams and all of the different awesome film, Basil Polidoro and all of these people that are writing and scoring the things that we love. And the fact that I look at them and there's no women, I'm like, what's going on? You need to feel, young people need to feel, we did this cocktail hour 10 weeks during the pandemic with Kate. She wanted to do something that fans could get into, that wouldn't cost any money. So she said, all right, let's do cocktail hours and I'll pick people every week. And my favorite one was the one that we did with kids under 21. The kids are all right. They really are. But they also are very quick to call out inequality. They're quick to call out, there were, I think there were 5 girls and one boy in our group because, Kate is, of course, a feminist icon. And I think the challenge, you said, I'm looking at your comment here, they feel more motivated to invest the hard work. Yes. But if you keep banging your head against something, people are there's a reason why I'm doing less and less convention panels and doing more and more in space. I have found that these conventions are run by guys. They're not prioritizing content. They're prioritizing how many photo ops can we fit into this 3-hour period. They want to make money. And I think, seeing the way that we need to get people engaged, get people invested in the idea of space as your reality. That's where it has to change. And a wonderful woman that I met through Inara is Loretta Whiteside. She's fabulous. She has an organization called Space Kind. And she basically said, when she was talking about the concept behind Space Kind is we need to be better to each other up there than we are down here. Down here we have so many seemingly insurmountable problems, prejudices, racism, sexism, all of these things. And we need to take it to the fact that we're just humans. We're the only humans that we know of. And like I said, we're all going to have to work together in order to achieve the next steps in humanity's evolution in space.
Amy, by the way, if I may, just a call out to the late, great Nichelle Nichols, from Star Trek, who of course,
yes, I have you behind me.
Epitomize what you're talking about. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for that question. It was very insightful. And yes, Nichelle did a ton to bring. She's literally, the Sci-Fi Sisters from the Trek Geeks Network, a podcast on there, they went and they did a wonderful tribute to Nichelle, and also in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And said, Nichelle said she went to have these meetings at NASA to be a partner with NASA. And she said, this is direct quote from her, which is, where are my people? She says, I'm not seeing Black faces. I'm not seeing, women. I'm seeing white guys. We need to, if you diversify that and bring in other good ideas, and when men have the emotional intelligence to learn how to share a room, learn how to share a boardroom, that's an important skill that I think we need to be instilling and teaching in young people. And a lot of them already have that. A lot of them are like, oh, you're gay, that's fine. Oh, you're non-binary, great. Oh, you're switching your pronouns, no big deal. That's the attitude we need to take, and not a lot of people.
We have a ways to go, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, not a lot of people are. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Courtney.
Yep.
Courtney, thanks for the question. And then we have time for one last question. Amy, we've got one from Thomas. Thomas says, I think one of the points you all just made is an important one. Can you talk more about how we can strike a balance between the arts and STEM and how they feed off each other?
Yeah, I think the arts are always going to inspire people to take the next step and to create. People are creative. You want to take your expertise and translate that. And I know Thomas, he's a friend of mine. He's a starship designer and an art director for Star Trek Online. So you're a great example of how you're doing that, Thomas, which is you're taking your ability and your passion for digital art and you're applying it to a property that is all completely STEM focused. The people walking around on starships are people who are making, like I said, making the next step. They're working together to solve big problems. And I think, we say STEM and there's also STEAM. And I've been trying to say STEAM more often because, the arts are an integral part of that. And our president at Explore Mars, Janet Ivey, absolutely stellar individual. She is very invested in the arts. She helps and has all of these programs where she works with kids to get them involved in creating and acting and singing and all of the things that give us joy, and that, the music that we're going, hopefully some of those female composers are in there and some of those kids, inspiring them. And we also do the Mars Innovation Challenge. And for kids who are like kindergarten and middle school, these are more like imaginative projects rather than, theoretical scientific implementation, right? So these are like what the little kids are thinking to themselves, well, what are we going to need on a different planet? What's going to happen if we can't breathe the air? What's going to happen if we have to farm and grow food? So I think fostering that creativity wherever it comes from is going to lead to more creative solutions for these big problems.
Well, and gaming is a huge industry that Space Force, for instance, is paying attention to. The aerospace industry is paying attention to, because oftentimes that is the entry point for youth. When they start dreaming about these futures they could be building. I'll ask a really quick question, then we have to go to our next segment. Thomas, really quickly to you, when you're designing these systems for your gaming world, are you ever cognizant that these could impact the real future outside of gaming? And feel free to unmute.
It's all good.
Okay.
He said, just a sec. No, I do know that, the way Thomas implements, the work that goes into creating a starship and, into his ships are also on Picard. So his ships have made the transition from Star Trek Online to actual Star Trek on screen. And it was because fans literally looked at it and were like, why are you copying and pasting these ships? Why don't we have all these cool different ships in there? And Thomas was like, here are the bazillion ships that I have created for Star Trek Online. Let me make them utterly fabulous for you and high res. And, he worked so hard at it. And I'm just very gratified to be able to have friends like that. There you go. You've unmuted.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. I wasn't expecting to speak. I was not
I like to keep it fresh,
It's interesting. I mean, we're doing, we're really focusing on things that you see in Star Trek and the show. So I think we mainly expect our inspiration to go one way, but we do have things where we have, like, you can go explore like a black hole in the game, or you can see like the jellyfish aliens from Encounter at Farpoint. We have cool things inspired by kind of the science fiction, science fantasy of Star Trek that we try to incorporate in the game to capture people's imaginations. And who knows? I mean, it could be that some people who played Star Trek Online when they're younger, that feeds into their love of Star Trek and their curiosity about space and science, and maybe helps them pick out a STEM career path or a space related career path. I mean, one of the things I'm most proud of, honestly, is that we just inspire a lot of artwork that a lot of our fans will take screenshots from the game and then they'll, you know, run them through some filters in Photoshop or gussy them up or whatever. And I think as a creative person, it's cool being, it's real. The highest compliment I can think of is just inspiring other people to also be creative based on the work that you made. So that's sort of.
I'm gonna challenge you. We need to poach you, Amy. Maybe we could get Thomas to help us lead a science contest to design ships that could be flown in the future. We're gonna have to get you to cross over with us.
Oh, I'm sure he'd love that.
Yeah,
That's all my
sounds great.
time. Thomas, Amy, thank you so much. Amy, such a great pleasure. Thank you for coming on. And I look forward. We're going to have you on again at some point.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much. This is great. And what a great group we have gathered today. So thank you again. And you guys can find me on social on at Amy Imhoff 1701. That is the call number of the enterprise. To be extra nerdy. So yeah, reach out to me on social if you have questions or want to talk about career trajectory. I'm always happy to help. So thank you again, Inara. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you both so much for that discussion. Really interesting. As a space communicator myself, I'm always thinking about this kind of back and forth ping pong of ideas between science fiction and the actual real life space industry. So it's exciting to hear you guys speaking about that.